There's a surprising amount of variety when it comes to mountain bike trail surfaces. I'm not talking about trail features like berms and wooden jumps though. I'm talking about the ground itself. Yes, it's all some combination of dirt, rocks, and roots, but how those are all mixed together makes a huge difference in traction and braking abilities. Most riders even base their tire choices on what they're riding the most, whether it's hard pack, loose over hard, mud, or constant rock gardens. When snow falls, you'd think all trail surfaces would be made equal, but that's not quite the case. Instead of being determined by dirt and rocks, traction and other handling characteristics are then determined by temperature, sunlight, and the trail users themselves. In this video, I'm going to discuss the different types of trails you may encounter in the snow and explain what it's like to ride each of them. Whether you're the first to ride after a storm or just exploring a deep powder off trail, Unpacked Snow is by far the trickiest to ride on. Flotation is key here, so big tires on wide rims are your best friend when it comes to getting as much tire surface on the ground as possible. Tire pressure also plays a huge role, and I found myself using anywhere from 4 all the way down to a single PSI in my tires, depending on how deep or crusty the snow is. Unpacked Snow leads to the slowest riding, especially when it comes to going uphill. The fun here comes from the challenge of maintaining your momentum and trying not to crash on the descent. While most of my rides in these soft conditions are typically shorter and have less elevation gain, I'm usually way more exhausted after because it's such a hard workout. Since I love exploring, riding Unpacked Snow is also really fun because I get to go to places that are rarely visited in the winter. Fewer people often means more wildlife, so I've run into elk and deer, seen bobcat and bear tracks, and encountered where coyotes had a recent meal. Riding in Unpacked Snow isn't my favorite snow trail surface, but it's a nice way to mix things up in the winter, especially if you've been riding the same groomed trails for weeks on end. On the opposite end of the spectrum, groomed trails are created using a snowmobile, a track sled, or some other motorized vehicle to create a really well-packed surface that's perfect for riding. Any size of fat bike tire, 3.8 inches and up, can be used on these trails, but tire pressure still plays a pretty important role. As long as it's not too hot out, running tires around 6 to 8 psi is ideal for these trails. If you run any higher or if it's especially warm out, you can create ruts in the trail, which will then freeze when things cool down. So if you're riding on a groomed trail and you notice you're really sinking into the snow, drop your tire pressure. If that doesn't help, it might just be too warm and you'll need to try when it's colder out. That's probably a good time to head to some of those unpacked trails. Groomed trails exist on both private and public land, but if you're riding a trail on public land, it's probably being groomed using some sort of grant or public funds. That's not always the case though. I frequently ride trails in an area called Thompson Park just outside of Butte, Montana. While it's technically owned by the local government, it's groomed in the winter by people volunteering many hours in the cold each week. Making sure you're not riding the trail is considered good trail etiquette and respects that time and money spent by people to keep these areas open and good for winter riding. So what's it like to ride these trails? In my opinion, groomed trails are the cream of the crop. They're easier to pedal and climb on and provide a surprising amount of traction, meaning you can corner without having to slow down a ton. Some of the most fun I've ever had on a bike ride has been on groomed trails, and it usually cures my longing for that hero dirt. I don't know why it's so fun, it just is. These trails are often the same trails you ride the rest of the year too, so if you're really missing your favorite summer single track, you can still do the same route, just without the heat. Probably the most common type of snow trail out there is the packed trail. These trails start out as unpacked, but due to high usage by trail users of all types, they quickly turn into a relatively solid surface. Any size fat bike tire works well on this type of surface, but you may also want to throw on a suspension fork because hikers can post hole and create the equivalent of a rock garden made out of snow and ice. Packed trails are a bit of a mixed bag and are totally dependent on who is using the trail and how warm it's been lately. One day the trail might essentially be a groomed trail, while the next it could be an icy mess with post holes everywhere. Like with a suspension fork, I'd also recommend using studded tires if this is going to be your primary snow surface. It's not a guarantee you'll have ice on your packed trails, but in my experience it's a lot more likely. That said, packed trails still make for a really fun ride. They're easy to pedal and maintain speed on, just like a groomed trail, but they have some of the fun unpredictability of an ungroomed trail. When I lived in Utah, 90% of my snow rides were on trails packed by everything from horses to hikers to snowmobiles. Sometimes they followed a paved road, and other times they were popular local hiking trails. One of my favorite routes to ride was Rock Canyon up to this big group campsite. It would always start out as a really wide and well-packed trail, and it would eventually turn into narrow single track bordered by really deep powder. It also climbed around 1,700 feet in just under 3 miles, which made for a really tough ride up, but an incredible descent on the way back down. Do I wish this trail was groomed? Actually, no. The variety was half of the fun. Another positive to packed trails is that they're more common and therefore more accessible. When I lived in Utah, there were some groomed trails, but it took me almost an hour to get to the trailhead, so I wasn't able to make it out to them very often. While they might not be considered as good as a groomed trail, at least you don't have to drive as far or ride the same trails over and over again. If you've never ridden a fat bike on a snow-covered trail, I would highly recommend it, assuming you have snow available. I'm pretty lucky to live close to trails that are groomed so well each winter, but don't let lack of access to trails like this keep you from getting out there. Whether you're on a pristine, groomed trail or blazing your own trail through deep powder in the forest, it's a great way to have fun and keep riding your bike all year round, which is something you know I like to do. Hopefully this video helped you understand more about riding in the snow, and if it did, please be sure to like the video and share it with anyone you think might learn something as well. If you have ideas or questions you'd like to see on a video in the future, just let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.